I woke up that morning with my heart already racing, because before my eyes even opened, I felt it. My bedroom floor trembling beneath me like something alive was crawling under the house. Not a gentle vibration, not the kind you feel during a distant thunderstorm. This one carried weight, like a warning knocking directly through the foundation. For a moment, I lay completely still, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just a heavy truck passing by, or maybe my imagination running wild again. But the second I placed my foot on the floor, the boards vibrated so sharply that the shake traveled all the way up my leg. That's when I knew something wasn't right. For the past 3 days, I'd noticed strange things happening around my home. Subtle at first, easy to ignore. The pipes groaned late at night, releasing sounds like metal stretching under pressure. My faucets coughed before water came out, sometimes spitting out streams with an odd metallic smell that reminded me of rust and heated copper. Twice, I watched the pressure gauge on my water heater spike for a second before dropping back down. Every sign pointed to the same conclusion. Something deep under our street was pushing against the system, and it was getting worse. That morning, after the floor tremor jolted me awake, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. The air carried a damp, mineral smell, something like wet concrete after a storm. When I kneeled near the water meter box, I heard it clearly for the first time, a faint hissing sound coming from somewhere under the soil. It wasn't the gentle hiss of a sprinkler or the occasional hiss of air in the system. This one had a steady push to it, like pressurized water forcing its way through a tiny opening. My stomach tightened. I knew enough about plumbing to understand that a hissing pipe underground was never a good sign. I walked straight to the HOA office to report it. Linda Hawthorne, our HOA president, stood behind the counter wearing her usual stiff blazer, pearls, and that forced professional smile she used whenever she thought a homeowner was wasting her time. I explained everything: the vibrations, the metallic smell, the pressure surges, and now the hissing underground. She raised an eyebrow as if I'd told her I saw ghosts crawling under my house. "Jake," she said in that slow, patronizing tone she used for dramatic effect, "you're misinterpreting normal settlement noises. Houses shift, soil compresses, pipes make sounds. This is all part of living in a community this size. Nothing is wrong." I insisted she at least send someone to check, but she shook her head, already turning to another stack of papers. "We can't waste HOA funds every time a homeowner hears a funny noise. Everything is fine." Her dismissal should have been the end of it, but as I walked back home, that uneasy feeling crept deeper into my chest. The vibrations seemed stronger than even an hour ago, and I couldn't shake the thought that something underneath us was building toward a breaking point. When I reached my driveway, I froze. A fresh crack, thin but long, ran across the sidewalk, and seeping through that crack was warm water. I knelt down and touched it, realizing instantly that something beneath our neighborhood was about to explode. The next morning, instead of help, I found a violation notice taped to my door. The yellow slip practically glowed in the early sunlight, stiff and accusing, fluttering just enough in the breeze to make my irritation rise with every movement. For a moment, I stood there staring at it, hoping it was some mistake, some mix-up that could be cleared with a simple conversation. But as soon as I saw the description, unauthorized digging near community pipes, my stomach tightened. So this was how the HOA chose to respond to a legitimate warning. Not with concern, not with urgency, with punishment. I pulled the notice off and headed down the walkway, my eyes instinctively drawn to the sidewalk. The crack from yesterday had widened, just slightly, but enough to make my heart pound. The edges looked sharper, the gap darker, as though the earth beneath had shifted overnight. I crouched and reached a hand toward it, feeling the warmth spilling up from the ground. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't exaggerating anything. Something under our feet was brewing. Inside the HOA office, Linda Hawthorne stood behind the counter. The same rigid posture, the same smug calmness she wore like armor. She didn't even greet me when I walked in, just lifted her chin with that practiced look of superiority. "Linda," I said, holding up the violation, "this is ridiculous. I didn't dig anything. I only inspected a crack in the sidewalk that's getting worse every day." She blinked slowly, unimpressed. "Jake, the board has reason to believe you caused unnecessary disturbance to HOA property. We cannot allow homeowners to tamper with utility lines. It sets a bad precedent." "Tamper?" I repeated, incredulous. "I didn't touch anything. I just looked. The crack is growing and warm water is coming through it." "That's not normal." She sighed loudly, the kind of sigh meant to embarrass the person she aimed it at. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Settlement cracks are common. What you're doing is spreading baseless fear. The community doesn't need that energy." "I'm not spreading fear," I said, keeping my voice steady even as frustration burned in my chest. "I'm trying to prevent a disaster. The pressure underground is rising. You can literally feel it." Linda tapped her nails against the desk, each tap sharp, dismissive. "Jake, we've already discussed this. Your concerns have no foundation. Please stop harassing the HOA with imagined emergencies." I left the office before my temper could get the better of me, but the anger lingered, buzzing beneath my skin, like the vibration I felt under my house. I kept thinking about that crack, about how warm the leaking water had felt. What was happening underground wasn't imaginary. It was escalating. That evening, determined to get someone to listen, I attended the HOA meeting again. But the moment I stood to speak, Linda cut me off in front of everyone. "Folks," she said dramatically, "we need to address the rumor spreading through the neighborhood. Jake believes our water system is about to explode." A few people chuckled. "We assure you, everything is stable. Please don't engage in panic-driven theories." Heat climbed up my neck. She wasn't just ignoring me. She was mocking me publicly. After the meeting, as I stepped outside into the cooler air, a soft voice called my name. Tom and Sarah Miller approached cautiously. "Jake, we heard something weird in our pipes last night," Tom admitted. "Like rushing water." Sarah nodded. "And our shower pressure jumped twice this morning. You're not imagining things." Their confirmation grounded me. I wasn't losing my mind. Something was wrong, and others were finally noticing it too. But when I got home later and checked the sidewalk again, the crack had widened even more. Thin but undeniably spreading, the edges now crumbling like the ground was preparing to split open. And just as I knelt to examine it, a deep echoing boom rumbled from beneath the asphalt, powerful enough to shake the ground under my feet. I wasn't planning on overhearing anything that morning. I was just walking past the HOA administration building, heading toward the mailbox cluster, when I heard voices coming from behind the corner. Quiet, hurried whispers. At first, I thought it was just another homeowner complaining about lawn citations or parking rules, but when I stepped closer, I saw Linda standing with a man I had never seen before. Tall, tailored suit, expensive watch, the type of presence that didn't belong in our quiet suburban development. The second they noticed me, both of them froze like children caught stealing from a cookie jar. Linda recovered first, plastering on her fake smile. The man beside her didn't say a word. He just stared at me, sizing me up like I was an inconvenience. "I didn't mean to interrupt," I said, trying to sound casual even though my instincts were screaming that something was off. Linda cleared her throat. "Jake, this is Richard Cole. He's consulting on some community matters." Richard gave a stiff nod, but his eyes remained cold. "Maintenance planning," he added, almost reluctantly. As I walked past them, pretending to mind my own business, I caught a quiet fragment of their conversation. Enough to make every alarm bell in my head ring at once. "We have to delay repairs until after the vote," Richard whispered. Linda responded, barely audible. "Budget cuts make it easy to justify. We'll handle complaints later." I kept walking, heart hammering, acting as though I hadn't heard a thing. But inside, everything clicked into place like a twisted puzzle. Linda wasn't ignoring the waterline issue because she thought it was nothing. She was ignoring it because fixing it didn't fit whatever agenda she and Richard were pushing. Budget cuts, delayed repairs, votes. All of it stank of corruption. As the day went on, the evidence around me seemed to multiply. I noticed small puddles forming along the curbs, even though it hadn't rained in days. Some were shallow, some deep enough to reflect the sun like tiny mirrors. Each one was warm to the touch. Something underground was spreading. Later, as I passed the neighborhood fire hydrant, I heard a grinding metallic groan that made my teeth clench. The hydrant shuddered for a moment, then went still. No one else noticed, but I did. The pressure beneath our feet wasn't just rising, it was trying to escape. And instead of sending help, the HOA sent me another violation. This one arrived tucked under my doormat. Bold red letters stamped across the top. Harassing board members. Apparently, Linda claimed my relentless accusations were disruptive and potentially damaging to community morale. I laughed bitterly as I read it. They weren't punishing me because I was wrong. They were punishing me because I was right. Later that night, while walking my dog near the HOA office, curiosity pulled me toward a faint light inside the meeting room. The blinds were half closed, but through the narrow gap I saw Linda and two board members gathered around a table. Papers were spread everywhere. One man held a maintenance report, one I recognized from the county records. I watched in disbelief as Linda nodded, and the man tore the report cleanly in half. Pieces of the truth fluttered to the floor like confetti from a celebration no one else was meant to see. And in that moment, I realized the HOA wasn't just ignoring danger, they were covering it up. At the county records office, the clerk handed me a worn, overstuffed file and said quietly, "You're not going to like what's inside." His tone alone told me everything. Whatever I was about to read wasn't going to be a minor oversight or a simple maintenance delay. I carried the file to a corner table, the fluorescent lights humming above me, and when I opened it, a musty old paper smell drifted out, like secrets that had been sealed too long. The first thing I noticed was the age of the documents. The earliest records dated back more than 30 years. Pipe schematics, installation logs, and handwritten inspection notes from contractors who were probably retired or dead by now. I flipped through page after page, and my uneasiness grew with every line. The pipes running beneath our development weren't just old. They were far beyond their recommended lifespan. According to multiple reports, they were overdue for replacement by almost a decade. Some notes even warned that the pressure levels during peak seasons were approaching unsafe thresholds. That alone should have been enough to trigger major repairs. But the more I dug, the more disturbing the truth became. I found 3 separate repair proposals from licensed contractors, each one stamped with a bright red denial. And each denial was signed by the same person, Linda Hawthorne. One proposal specifically warned that delaying maintenance could lead to catastrophic line failure, yet Linda had dismissed it with a handwritten note, not an immediate priority. Seeing her signature over and over made my pulse quicken. She knew the system was deteriorating, and she blocked repairs anyway. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. The law was clear. Homeowners had the right to access these records under county transparency laws. That's the only reason I was even able to get this file. But I kept thinking about all the residents, all the families living above those failing pipes, completely unaware of the danger beneath their driveways. Linda didn't deny repairs out of ignorance. She denied them with full knowledge. I spread out the documents, photographing every page with my phone. I wanted everything. The schematics, the repair proposals, the stamped denials, the notes about pressure inconsistencies. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that could show the community exactly what Linda had buried. Then I added my own evidence, pictures of the cracks, videos of the sidewalk leak, time-stamped recordings of the strange late-night hissing. When I reached the more recent records, I felt my chest tighten. A pressure monitoring report from last week showed an alarming spike, far higher than anything recorded in years. The technician who logged the data had flagged it for immediate review. That review, according to the notes, was forwarded straight to the HOA president. And based on the torn documents I had watched Linda destroy, I knew exactly what she had done with it. But something caught my eye at the bottom of the page. A small graph showed daily readings leading up to the spike. The line was rising, not gradually, but sharply, steadily, predictably, like a fuse burning toward an explosion. I scanned the numbers again, feeling the weight of the realization settle heavily in my stomach. The pressure wasn't just high. It was climbing every single day, and if it kept rising at this rate, we weren't just sitting on a problem, we were sitting on a countdown. The first scream came from a mother across the street. I heard her before I even saw what happened. When I looked up, a sudden burst of water shot straight out of the pavement, an explosive jet rising several feet into the air, just inches from a little boy riding his bike. The child swerved instinctively, nearly toppling over as the water sprayed across the road like a ruptured fire hydrant. Neighbors rushed toward him, shouting, pulling him back, shielding him. The look on his mother's face said everything. Fear, shock, disbelief. No one expected water to come bursting out of the middle of the street on a dry, cloudless morning. But before anyone could fully process it, the HOA maintenance van pulled up, and two board members jumped out. They barely glanced at the chaotic scene before one of them called out, "Sprinkler malfunction. We'll get it handled." Sprinkler malfunction, as if any sprinkler could shoot a pressurized column of water through solid asphalt. People exchanged confused looks, but fear kept them silent. The HOA had spoken, and that was apparently enough. I wasn't staying silent. I pushed through the small crowd, pulled out my phone, and showed Linda, who had now arrived in her pristine blazer and sunglasses, the video I took earlier of water leaking through the sidewalk crack. "This is underground leakage," I said firmly. "Not sprinklers, not runoff. We're dealing with a failing main line. Look at the pressure. Look at the way it's escaping." Linda didn't even glance at the screen for more than a second before her expression hardened. "Jake, you are dangerously close to defaming the HOA with false claims. You're spreading misinformation and causing unnecessary panic." "False?" I said, stunned. "Linda, a kid almost got hit by a water explosion. We're running out of time. The main line is deteriorating faster than any of us realized." She leaned in, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. "If you continue spreading these accusations, we will take legal action. Consider this your final warning." It was unbelievable. A literal geyser erupted from the pavement, and rather than acknowledging the danger, she threatened me with a lawsuit for trying to protect the community. The crowd around us grew quiet. Neighbors who once avoided my concerns were now staring between me and Linda with uncertainty, fear, and slowly forming doubt. The HOA's rehearsed excuses weren't working as smoothly anymore. I turned to face everyone. "I'm telling you all right now, the main line is close to failing. This wasn't random. This was pressure escaping. I've seen the records. I've seen the warnings. If we don't act, the entire system is going to give out." People murmured. Some looked shaken. A few stepped closer, asking questions, real questions. For the first time, I felt the shift. The community was beginning to take me seriously. Even the ones who had rolled their eyes at me days ago were now staring at the still steaming water pooling across the street with raw concern. But while their confidence was growing, my fear was only getting deeper. Because just as I stepped back to look at the road, I noticed something that turned my stomach cold. The asphalt wasn't just cracked or leaking. It was swelling, rising upward ever so slightly, like something underneath was pushing, straining, trying to break free. And in that quiet moment before anyone else noticed, I realized the worst of it hadn't even started yet. That night, long after the sun had dipped below the rooftops and the neighborhood had gone quiet, I heard it again. Only this time, it wasn't subtle. It wasn't a faint hiss or a distant groan. It sounded like a river was flowing directly underneath my bedroom floor. A steady rushing surge, pushing, forcing, filling spaces where water was never meant to be. I sat up in bed, heart thudding, listening as the noise grew louder, closer, heavier. Every instinct in me screamed that whatever was happening underground had escalated. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside, the night air cool against my skin. As I stepped onto the lawn, my foot sank slightly, just enough to make me pause. I pressed my heel down again, and the ground gave way with a spongy, unsettling softness. Something beneath the soil was shifting. "Jake?" a voice whispered from the side yard. I turned to see Tom Miller walking toward me with a flashlight of his own. His expression told me he'd heard it too. "You feel this?" he asked, pressing down on his lawn. The grass beneath his boots squished like a soaked sponge. "It's getting worse," I said. "The entire ground is softening. Pressure's pushing everything up." We walked around my yard, carefully stepping where the soil seemed firmest, though nothing felt truly stable anymore. As we approached the far corner near the fence, I saw it. A sudden depression in the earth. A dark oval shape about 3 feet wide. I crouched to look closer, angling my flashlight beam across it. "Jake," Tom breathed. "That's a sinkhole." Sure enough, the ground had dropped several inches, swallowing part of the grass and leaving jagged edges around the opening. I reached toward it and felt warm, humid air rising from below. Warm air didn't come from harmless cracks. Warm air meant active water movement. Fast water, pressurized water. Before we could investigate further, a flashlight beam swung across us, harsh and blinding. "Hey, what are you two doing out here?" a gruff voice barked. Carl, the HOA's so-called security guard, marched toward us. A big guy, wide frame, always wearing a sour expression like he'd been forced into every moment of his life. He stopped a foot away, hands on his belt. "Linda wants you to stop wandering around at night," he said. "You're causing disturbances, upsetting people. You need to back off." I stepped forward, anger rising. "Carl, a sinkhole just formed in my yard. The water line is breaking apart. We don't need intimidation. We need repairs." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Drop it, Jake. For your own good." Tom muttered something under his breath, but Carl glared at him until he stayed quiet. After the guard finally walked off, I pulled out my phone and called the county emergency utilities line, praying someone would take me seriously. The operator listened patiently, then said, "We can't intervene without authorization from your HOA. Shared infrastructure is under their jurisdiction, unless there's immediate public safety risk." I almost laughed. "So you're saying the HOA has to approve the county to fix their own mess? That's how shared property statutes work, sir." A bitter truth hit me. The HOA controlled everything beneath our feet. They held the power to act, and they were choosing not to. I hung up, feeling helpless and furious. Tom offered a sympathetic nod before heading back home. "Call me if it gets worse," he said. I didn't have to wait long. When I turned my flashlight back toward the sinkhole, the ground shifted. Not subtly, not slowly. It dropped, another inch, then 2, as the earth sagged inward, collapsing like a sponge losing its structure. And I stood there watching, breath caught in my throat, as my backyard continued sinking in real time. A sound like a bomb going off snapped me awake at sunrise. One moment I was asleep, the next I was sitting upright in bed with my heart slamming against my ribs. The blast was so loud it seemed to vibrate inside my skull, and for a split second I thought the house itself had exploded. Then the floor shook violently, aggressively, throwing a glass off my nightstand and sending it shattering across the floor. This wasn't the subtle tremor I'd felt the night before. This was force. This was destruction. I jumped out of bed and ran toward the window. Even before I reached it, I heard the roar, the deep thundering roar of water under unimaginable pressure breaking free. When I stepped outside, barefoot and half-dressed, the sight in front of me didn't feel real. The main line near the subdivision entrance had ruptured so violently that a massive geyser was shooting into the sky, higher than the trees, twisting and thrashing like a fountain gone feral. White spray hung in the air like mist, catching the early sunlight in a haunting glow. Then the road gave way. Huge chunks of asphalt tore upward, ripped apart as if they were nothing more than thin sheets of paper. Water surged beneath them in thick, violent waves, lifting pieces of roadway and hurling them aside. The impact rattled windows. I heard a car alarm scream across the street before the entire vehicle lifted slightly, its tires losing grip on the ground as water began rushing around it. Within seconds, more cars were floating, bumping into each other like toys in a bathtub. I sprinted toward the street, shouting for neighbors to get out, to move away, to run. The chaos unfolded too fast for anyone to process. Doors flew open. People rushed outside, some still in pajamas, clutching children, dogs, phones. The rushing water swallowed everything in its path: lawns, driveways, mailboxes, transforming them into swirling currents. A woman screamed as the water swept across her porch steps, knocking over her planters and dragging them away. A man across the cul-de-sac grabbed his elderly father by the arm, struggling to help him wade through the rising flood. The sound, the sheer volume of it, was overwhelming. A monstrous crash of water, earth, and concrete pulling itself apart. The subdivision wasn't flooding slowly. It was drowning, violently and instantly. I ran toward a cluster of neighbors who were trying to move away from the growing torrent. "Stay away from the entrance," I shouted over the thunder of water. "It's collapsing, go toward higher ground." A few nodded, terrified. Others simply ran, instinct taking over. I felt the water rise around my ankles, then my calves, cold and violent as it surged past. A child cried somewhere behind me. Someone yelled for their dog. Another neighbor tripped, and two others rushed to pull him up before the water overtook him. And still the geyser raged on, carving a monstrous wound into the road. But then something else caught my attention, something even worse. As I turned toward the community center up the street, I saw the pavement shifting again, lifting in a slow, unnatural bulge. A crack spread across the asphalt like a dark lightning bolt, splitting wider by the second. The ground shuddered beneath it, swelling, pulsing. It wasn't just one rupture. Another one, bigger, was forming right in front of me, and when I saw the second pressure pocket stretching upward like something alive, I knew the worst was still coming. Within minutes, my street transformed into a waist-deep river. What had started as a violent burst at the entrance spread through the entire subdivision like a tidal wave, swallowing everything in its path. The water was murky, brown with churned-up soil, bits of mulch, shredded grass, and debris swirling around my legs as I struggled to keep my footing. The current had weight. It pulled, pushed, and threatened to drag anything not anchored down. Houses that had stood perfectly dry moments before were suddenly flooded. Water poured through open doors and shattered basement windows, gushing inside like the walls had turned into waterfalls. I could hear the dull roar of basements filling fast, the hollow echo of air pockets collapsing, furniture scraping against floors as it floated, collided, or toppled over. It didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a disaster zone. Somewhere behind me, a transformer sparked. I turned just in time to see electrical wires whip and crackle above the rising flood. The transformer exploded with a sharp, blinding flash, sending a spray of sparks across the water. The boom echoed through the neighborhood, lighting up terrified faces in brief, jagged bursts. A second transformer blew a moment later, plunging half the street into darkness. People screamed. Dogs barked from rooftops. A man yelled for his wife, who had been swept toward the cul-de-sac by the rushing current. Everything was chaos, raw, unfiltered panic. Then I saw them, Mr. and Mrs. Porter, my elderly neighbors, clinging to their porch railing as the water climbed up their chests. They were both in their 80s, frail and terrified, unable to wade against the water's strength. Without thinking, I rushed toward them, fighting the current step by step. A large wooden door, someone's front door ripped clean off its hinges, floated by, spinning slowly. I grabbed it and dragged it behind me. "Jake!" Mr. Porter cried, his voice trembling. We can't walk." "I know," I shouted back. "Hold on, I've got you." I wedged the floating door against their porch steps and helped them onto it. The water rocked it, but it held. I pushed the makeshift raft carefully, guiding it toward higher ground where the water was shallower. Every second felt like a battle. Debris bumping into us, the current threatening to turn us sideways, the fear that the door might split under the weight. But somehow, step by step, I got them to safety. As soon as I helped them off the raft, a shrill voice sliced through the noise. "There he is! He caused this!" I turned to see Linda Hawthorne standing knee-deep in water, mascara streaking down her face, hair soaked and clinging to her cheeks. She looked wild, desperate. She pointed at me with shaking hands. "This is Jake's fault," she screamed. "He's been causing hysteria for days. He sabotaged something, I know it." Even in the chaos of a flooding neighborhood, her ego found a way to make me the villain. Several neighbors stared at her in disbelief. A few shook their heads, but Linda didn't stop. She kept ranting, tripping over her own words, blaming me for everything she had ignored. Then, cutting through the noise, a series of emergency vehicles arrived. Sirens blaring, red and blue lights reflecting off the muddy water. A fire truck forced its way as close as it could to the flood front. Firefighters jumped out, assessing the devastation with tense urgency. The fire chief, a tall man with a stern expression, waded straight toward Linda. "You're the HOA president?" he asked sharply. Linda froze. "Yes, but this isn't our fault." He held up a hand, stopping her cold. "We need to talk. Right now." And as he led her away, his face dark and unreadable, I knew the truth was finally about to surface. Linda pointed at me in front of the fire chief, her voice shrill and cracking, accusing me, of sabotaging the water system. Even after the explosions, the flooding, the near drownings, she clung to the same desperate lie. "He's been tampering with the pipes for days," she shouted, splashing through knee-deep water as if her performance mattered more than the disaster around us. "He's the one who caused all this panic. He wanted this to happen." The fire chief, a broad-shouldered man with a face hardened by years of emergency calls, turned toward me with a measured, steady stare. He wasn't convinced. Not by her theatrics. Not by her finger-pointing. He simply said, "Sir, is any of this true?" I took a breath, lifted my soaked phone from my pocket, and held it out. "No," I said firmly. "But I can show you what really happened." The chief nodded. Two firefighters moved closer, shielding the phone from the splashing water as I opened my evidence folder. I showed them everything: photos of the widening cracks, videos of the warm water leaking through the sidewalk, recordings of the hissing underground, and the time-stamped clip of the maintenance report I caught Linda tearing apart through the blinds. Then I showed them the county file, the pipe schematics, the denied repair proposals, the pressure readings. "This isn't sabotage," I said. "This is neglect. This is the HOA ignoring every possible warning and burying the proof." As the chief scrolled through the documents, his expression darkened. He turned slowly toward Linda. "Ma'am, we're going to need your HOA maintenance records. All of them." Linda swallowed, eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. "Our office is flooded," she stammered. "Everything is probably damaged. We may not have immediate access to. You will give them to us." The chief interrupted, his tone sharp as a blade. "This is now a public safety investigation." Linda's mouth twitched. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply froze, her eyes shifting toward the HOA building like she was calculating whether she could outrun reality. I stepped forward. "Chief," I said, "the HOA received a report last week showing a major pressure spike. They knew this was coming." He narrowed his eyes. "And they didn't notify the county?" "No," I answered. "They tried to hide it." The chief turned back to his team. "Get inside that office. I want every file, every report, every correspondence. Suppressing documented safety warnings is a criminal offense in this state." That was the law nugget more people needed to know. Homeowners might not realize it, but hiding infrastructure safety reports isn't just unethical. It's illegal, a violation that could bring felony charges. I watched the realization sink into the faces of nearby neighbors who had gathered to listen. While the firefighters moved toward the HOA office, I noticed someone slipping away behind a half-submerged hedge, a tall, well-dressed figure trying and failing to blend in with the chaos. Richard Cole. He kept glancing back over his shoulder, inching toward the side street, water sloshing up his trousers. He wasn't running, but his hurried walk told me everything. He knew exactly what was inside those HOA files, and he didn't want to be present when they were found. "Chief," I said, pointing, "that man is with the HOA. He's involved." But before the chief could react, one of his firefighters shouted from the office door, "Sir, you need to see this." We all turned toward the voice. The firefighter held up a soaked trash bag he'd pulled from inside. Inside the translucent plastic were shredded papers, dozens of them, matted together in soggy clumps. And as the chief tore open the bag, I realized we had just uncovered the first layer of the HOA's buried truth. Investigators pulled up emails that revealed every lie Linda had told us, and the moment the first message appeared on the fire chief's tablet, the last pieces of her carefully built facade collapsed. I stood among soaked neighbors inside the temporary emergency tent the county had set up near the subdivision entrance, listening as the county investigator read the first chain aloud. The emails were cold, calculated, and unmistakably incriminating. Linda and Richard hadn't just ignored the pipeline warnings, they had coordinated a cover-up, strategizing how to delay repairs, silence complaints, and manipulate the upcoming community vote. One email from Richard made the tent go silent. "Hold off on repairs until my acquisition clears. After the vote, we can approve the budget increase and run it through the new development fund. No one will question it." Linda's reply was even worse. "Understood. Homeowners won't care about pressure spikes if we keep the reports internal. We can claim budget limitations if needed." Budget limitations. The very excuse she used when I begged her to take action. My fists tightened involuntarily. As investigators kept scrolling, more messages surfaced. Bank transfers, unreported withdrawals, and spreadsheets clearly showing that thousands of dollars from the Community Repair Fund had been rerouted into two personal accounts, one under Richard's company and another under Linda's niece's name. They weren't just negligent, they were siphoning money that should have saved this neighborhood from disaster. The fire chief exhaled deeply, shaking his head. "This wasn't incompetence," he said. "This was deliberate." A county official turned to me. "Mr. Turner, we need your testimony as soon as possible. You were the first to raise concerns, and your documentation will be essential." Hours later, still damp from the floodwaters, I sat inside a crowded emergency county hearing room. The walls buzzed with murmurs from angry residents, some crying, others shaking with fury. When I took the stand, I told everything, from the first vibration to the sidewalk leak, from Linda's mockery to the threats, from the torn reports to the sinkhole. Every detail I'd collected over the last week suddenly held weight in a way it hadn't before. The board hung onto every word. When I stepped down, the room erupted. Neighbors shouted questions at the officials. Others called for Linda's removal on the spot. Some simply asked why no one believed me earlier. The emotion in the room felt electric. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, all mixing with the bitter truth that our disaster wasn't an accident but a consequence of greed. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Linda, escorted into the hearing by two officers, faced the community she had failed. People yelled at her, demanded answers, called her a liar. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't speak. She didn't defend herself. She didn't roll her eyes, or sigh, or lecture anyone. She just stared down at the floor, shoulders trembling slightly. Her perfect, unshakable composure was gone. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a commanding presence, raised a hand to silence the room. "Order," she said firmly. "After reviewing the evidence presented today, this court finds substantial grounds to proceed with criminal charges." The room went silent. The judge continued. "Effective immediately, a full financial and operational audit of the Homeowners Association will be conducted. All HOA accounts, communications, and contracts will be seized for investigation. Charges will include fraud, negligence, misuse of community funds, suppression of safety reports, and conspiracy. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, and as the gavel struck the bench, I realized we were only beginning to uncover the damage Linda and Richard had left behind. Linda was escorted out in handcuffs, refusing to look at me. Her usually perfect posture was gone, her shoulders hunched and trembling as officers guided her through the crowd of furious neighbors. People shouted at her, some demanding answers, others demanding apologies she would never give. Her mascara had run down her cheeks, and her expression, once so smug, so superior, was now hollow. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered every warning she dismissed, every threat she made, every life she put at risk. The handcuffs didn't look cruel. They looked appropriate. Richard Cole wasn't far behind her. He tried to maintain his calm businessman facade, chin high, suit soaked from the flood, but the officers flanking him made his arrogance look shallow. He kept muttering about misunderstandings and miscommunication, but no one listened. The charges rang louder than his excuses: fraud, negligence, conspiracy, embezzlement. It was over for both of them. With the HOA effectively dismantled, the county stepped in immediately. Emergency. Repair crews worked day and night, tearing up ruined roads, exposing shattered pipes, and installing brand new infrastructure before the remaining pressure could cause further damage. The roar of machinery echoed through the neighborhood for days, but this time, the noise wasn't terrifying. It was reassuring. It meant someone was finally doing the job that should have been done years ago. Neighbors watched from porches and temporary shelters as the county engineers inspected the water system. They found break after break, corrosion eating through every joint, weak patches that could have failed at any moment. It stunned all of us how long the system had been deteriorating, how close we had come to losing far more than cars, basements, and property. The county announced a compensation plan for the residents, funded by seized HOA accounts, insurance tied to criminal negligence claims, and the assets recovered from Linda and Richard's illegal transfers. Homeowners who'd lost furniture, appliances, sentimental items, and entire basements received emergency relief checks. For the first time since the disaster began, I saw genuine hope return to people's eyes. A week later, the board tapped me on the shoulder and made a surprising request. They wanted me to serve as the temporary homeowner liaison during the reconstruction. At first, I resisted. I'd never wanted power. I just wanted someone to listen. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If anyone understood how badly this community needed change, it was me. I accepted, not out of pride, but out of responsibility. I wanted to make sure no one would ever be silenced the way I had been. During one of the town hall meetings held inside the community gymnasium, I looked out at the crowd, tired, rebuilding, determined, and offered a moment for reflection. "What would you do?" I asked them, "if your HOA ignored a life-threatening warning?" The room went quiet. People shifted in their seats. Some sighed, some nodded, some clenched their fists. The question wasn't about blame anymore. It was about awareness, vigilance, voice. If this ordeal had taught us anything, it was that silence and trust without scrutiny could be deadly. After the meeting ended and residents drifted out into the cool night air, I stayed behind to gather documents. That's when I noticed a small envelope on the table, plain white, no name on the outside. I frowned, picking it up. The paper was slightly damp, like it had been carried through the flood. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, taken at night, showing a section of ground near the community's west end. The soil was bulging upward, just like the first crack I'd seen, and as I stared at the picture, a chill crawled down my spine. Because whatever this was, it wasn't over yet. Standing at the newly repaired entrance of our neighborhood, I felt a heaviness settle over me. The road was smooth again, the pipes beneath it, brand new, the landscaping restored, but none of it could erase the memory of that morning when everything broke. As the cool wind brushed against my face, I realized just how close we had come to losing everything. Our homes, our safety, and in some cases, even our lives. The repairs made the place look whole again, but the people who lived here carried the scars like invisible cracks no crew could patch. The community was rebuilding, but the trauma lingered. Some neighbors still jumped at the sound of rushing water. Others couldn't sleep when the pipes in their walls creaked at night. Parents kept their children away from the streets where the ruptures happened, even though the ground was perfectly stable now. The flood had changed us. It had pulled the illusion of security right out from under our feet. As I walked deeper into the subdivision, I found myself thinking about the early warning signs, the vibrations I felt those first mornings, the metallic smell in the water, the hissing beneath the soil, all the moments I doubted myself, all the times Linda dismissed me, all the evidence that should have prompted immediate action. If I'd ignored those instincts, if I'd let her silence me, I don't want to imagine what the outcome would have been. The neighborhood hadn't just flooded, it had nearly collapsed under the weight of its own neglect. That's the part people don't talk about when buying a home. They check the school districts, the commute time, maybe even the noise levels. But they rarely check the HOA's infrastructure history. And they should, because those records can determine whether a community thrives or drowns. My advice, the nugget I wish I'd understood years ago, is simple. Always inspect your HOA's maintenance logs, repair history, and financial decisions before you buy. Transparency isn't optional, it's survival. But even with everything out in the open now, one thing kept gnawing at me. The envelope, the anonymous photo, the image of a new bulge forming on the west end of the neighborhood, eerily similar to the one that started the disaster. I had shown the county engineers, and while they assured me they'd investigate, something about that photo felt different. The bulge wasn't near any documented weak point. It wasn't part of the damaged system that had already been replaced. It was new, fresh, and unexplained. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just soil shifting after the heavy repairs. But deep down, I felt the same uneasy vibration I'd felt weeks earlier. The sense that something wasn't right. Something unseen was moving beneath us, and the fact that someone sent the photo anonymously made my skin crawl. Someone knew something. Someone was watching. Someone wanted me to see it. As the sun dipped behind the rebuilt homes and cast long shadows across the street, I slipped the envelope back into my jacket. My role as liaison wasn't just a temporary position anymore. It was a responsibility I couldn't walk away from. The community trusted me now. They believed me, and I wasn't about to let them face another threat alone. Before heading home, I paused at the entrance and took one last look at the neighborhood. Standing, restored, but forever changed. "Share your story," I murmured, imagining the countless people out there facing their own battles with power-drunk HOAs. And subscribe for the next chapter, because this isn't over. Later that night, when I finally opened the envelope completely, I found a second photo tucked behind the first, showing another waterline already bulging beneath the ground, waiting, almost daring, to burst.